Hi, I'm Brad Dacus.
And I'm Kyle Campbell.
Welcome to Faith and Law.
We're breaking down political and legal issues of the day through a biblical lens.
Hi, I'm Brad Dacus. Welcome to Faith and Law. Today we're going to talk about a hot issue dealing with something that's debated all the time, and that's the concept of separation of church and state. We've seen it used in the courts, in cases. We see it used in the public square. We see it used as pretext to silence people of faith, institutions of faith. What does it actually mean? Is it really legitimate? Is it actually in the Constitution? Well, we're going to talk about that today. And specifically, let me give you some examples to sort of start off the conversation of how we've seen it applied in the past. So we've seen entities try to use it to sterilize faith and religion from the public square, including, for example, our national motto. A number of years ago, an organization made up of atheists sued to take our national motto off our currency. In God we trust. We at Pacific Justice Institute, we stepped into the case, we intervened in the case, and we argued that no, this expression, in God we trust, is constitutional. Why is it constitutional? Well, it doesn't endorse a particular religion. Now, the whole reason that we have seen this language used is in the context of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The Establishment Clause was written to make sure that we would not be like England. At the time we became a nation, England had the official Church of England, the King's Church, the Episcopal Church. Well, as it turns out, many who came to the United States came to the U.S. because they weren't Anglicans, they weren't Episcopals. They believed in the gospel. They believed in more pure Christianity, less religiosity, whatever their justification was. They came to America to escape the official Church of England and to have religious freedom. So when they came time to writing the Constitution, they said, look, let's make sure we don't become like the Church of England and have religious oppression all over again. Let's have religious freedom. So they had the Free Exercise Clause saying people have the ability to practice their faith. Then they have the Establishment Clause, which is there not to protect the government from churches and people of faith. Quite the opposite. It's to protect the church from the government. From the government coming in and saying, oh no, this is our official religion. This is how you do communion, or this is how you don't do communion, etc. It was to protect the church, people of faith, from a state and government that would be hostile and domineering and persecuting people of faith. That's what this is all about. So we at Pacific Justice Institute, we argued this clearly before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in this defense of In God We Trust. How did it turn out? Well, the Ninth Circuit, surprisingly to many, agreed with us and ruled in favor of our national motto, In God We Trust, to be on all of our currency across the country. It's also been validated as a part of our Pledge of Allegiance by the courts. We've seen it used, this kind of case law, to protect religious speech and religious expression in the public square. Now, we've had our pushbacks. For example, we've seen times where people are preaching the gospel in public places, and we at PJI have had to step in and defend them. We've seen students try to be silenced when they want to sing a religious song for the talent show, and the public school teachers say, oh, no, separation of church and state. We've stepped in on those as well. The bottom line is we at PJI have been defending the false narrative of the separation of church and state time and time and time again. And the good news is because of the prior appointments by President Donald Trump during his first term of appointing judges to the courts and specifically to the Supreme Court, we now have the most pro-religious freedom Supreme Court in my lifetime, if not in U.S. history. So we've got a lot of positive things to move forward but we still have a lot of work to do because there's still a lot of people out there with a false impression of application of the Establishment Clause, still using that phrase, separation of church and state. To help me talk about this issue and how it's actually been applied and how we at PJI have fought against this tyrannical usage of this phrase to oppress faith, I'd like to bring on now the attorney who heads up our office in Oregon, Attorney Ray Hackey. Ray, welcome to the show. Ray, tell me, in your own words, how does this phrase separation of church and state fit into the Constitution, or does it at all?
Yeah, well, it's my understanding that when Thomas Jefferson wrote of separating church and state, it wasn't meant so much to keep religious influence out of government as it was to keep government from interfering with the church and dictating how the church should behave. It was all about not dictating what people should believe, how they should practice, that sort of thing. That's why our Constitution has an Establishment Clause and a Free Exercise Clause. It's often been misunderstood and misinterpreted to mean that religion needs to be kept out of the government sphere entirely. And while government does have a duty to remain neutral, it certainly is not immune or prohibited from religious influence.
Ray, why is PJI passionate about promoting religious freedom in public schools?
Well, PJI is passionate about advocating for biblically inspired teachings and moral values in education for a number of reasons. I mean, for starters, let's look at the state of today's schools. I mean, we're seeing mass shootings. We're seeing, boys and girls locker rooms and bathrooms and changing spaces and competing on sports teams. I mean, talk about exchanging the truth for a lie, as it talks about in Romans. We're basically what's kind of created now is God's been removed, and so now all of a sudden, and it's not just that. It's about our history. It's about, if we look at the Constitution, if we look at the Declaration of Independence, where is the source of all that? Where is the source of principles such as innocent until proven guilty in a court of law? There are principles of justice that are advocated for in the Bible. And it's not pushing religion on individuals to say that we get this concept from the Bible. It'd be one thing if we're commanding that they believe it. It's another to say that this is where our morals and principles come from.
Ray, how does Pacific Justice Institute differentiate between promoting moral values in public schools and public places versus proselytizing religion in public schools?
That's a good question. I think that there are certain principles that I think a lot of us agree on, starting with thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, in other words, lie. I think so teaching those moral values, on the one hand, you've heard about there are some teachers who say, well, it's not our job to teach moral values, that's the parents' job. And I do believe that it largely does fall within the parents' duty to teach those moral values. But at the same time, there are also teachers in the public schools who are teaching moral values, and who they seem to believe that it's their duty to undo what parents teach. It's their. That's why you have so many teachers pushing, LGBT issues and tolerance of, and some of them are even displaying pride flags and things like that. And so, a lot of public schools have been pushing moral values, quote unquote, that, are directly opposite to some people. And so, if we're talking about moral values like kindness, understanding, patience, reconciliation, including across, perhaps racial or gender boundaries. I mean, those are all things that the Bible discusses. And so, if we're saying, okay, the Bible teaches this, you're teaching about it. You're not necessarily teaching what, you're not telling people that they have to follow it. You're just saying, okay, this is what the Bible teaches.
So is there, you think, a way for schools to actually teach moral values in public schools without crossing that boundary line of the First Amendment and the Establishment Clause?
I do. I think that it kind of needs to be made clear that, first of all, students have the right not to believe in God. And, if we go all the way back to, some of the early cases involving students' rights in public schools and constitutional rights in particular, there was a case out of 1943 where students these were Jehovah's Witnesses, they didn't have to salute, the Supreme Court said they didn't have to salute the American flag because they believed that saluting the flag is a form of idol worship. There was another case where, students couldn't be forced to read the Bible or pray. But just because we can't force them to do those things doesn't mean schools can't allow those things. It's another for a teacher to stand in front of the classroom and say, this religion is the only way to heaven. That's not what we're talking about here. That's for Sunday school. That's for church. We are talking about the Bible is simply as a source of our jurisprudence, talking about using it as a historical reference. It's used in classrooms as a literary reference. It's not necessarily pushing values, but I do agree that to some degree it has led to a moral void because we've got, like I said, we've got school shootings happening. Okay, back when I was in high school, more than 30 years ago, school shootings weren't happening. I mean, there might have been fights on campus, but we weren't. So I mean, where do students believe that they have the moral right to just even if they're being bullied, to go on campus and shoot up their enemies? Okay, where do students get this idea that they can, just walk into a boy can just walk into a girl's locker room and see girls in various states of undress and say, I have a right to be there because I think I'm a girl too. I mean, there is kind of a moral void there, and that I do think it's it's been that certain principles have been abandoned and need to find their way back.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Ray, for those insights. I'd like to take some time now and dig a little bit deeper into the concept of separation of church and state. It's an important one to understand, and it's actually more complicated than you might understand or believe. Separation in church of state, you probably hear it all the time, but it is often misunderstood and often flipped. So let's talk about it. Where did it come from and what is it? Let's remember what we're talking about here. The words and the phrase separation of church and state is actually not a part of the United States Constitution. It is a concept that it is enshrined actually in our very first freedom in the First Amendment. And it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So this is known as the Establishment Clause. The opening lines of the First Amendment prohibit the government from creating an official religion or favoring one religion or non-religion over another. Now, don't forget that the founders, who were men of deep faith, and there are a lot of writings about how they were, a lot of research done on their own writings and their own lives that found that their number one influence was the Bible. Also, they had just fled from England, where the King of England had mandated that everyone be a part of the Church of England. And You could oppose that and do your best to not be a part of the Church of England, but that didn't go very well for you. So here we are establishing and creating new laws in a new country. And of course, that was the first thing. It's why it's in the First Amendment, is that the founders wanted to preserve and enshrine Americans' rights to choose their religion, to choose the way they practice their faith. There wasn't going to be a Church of the United States that everyone had to participate in. Otherwise, you'd have terrible consequences. So here we have the Establishment Clause and really separation of church and state, enabling Americans to live out their faith publicly as well as privately in the way that they want. Now, I just mentioned that this is not actually language that's found in the U.S. Constitution. So where does it come from? It actually comes from Thomas Jefferson. There was the Danbury Baptist Association, who was afraid that being Baptist, they were a small minority, that they would suffer political, or not political, but persecution for their faith. So they penned a letter to Thomas Jefferson and said, "We are worried about this." And Jefferson wrote back and he responded, emphasizing that the First Amendment's free exercise and establishment clauses together created a wall of separation between the church and the state. So how is this misinterpreted so much, especially today in our society? Well, that's because people forget. We forget the history and the purpose of why separation of church and state was mentioned and clarified as part of the First Amendment from Thomas Jefferson. What he meant was, in this country, in this nation, we're not going to be like England. We're going to make sure that government, that politics does not influence our right and ability to be men and women of faith, a faith of our choosing, and to express that publicly should we choose. So we have that protection, we have that right. But unfortunately, over time, it has been misconstrued to mean that faith should have no part in politics or governance. Now again, we can look back even recently. There is a spiritual heritage tour of our nation's Capitol building because there is so much faithful spiritual imagery, art, writings within that building that reflect our founders' intentions and how this country was founded. All right, so what do we do with this? How's this playing out, and how do we respond as Christians? Well, we need to look no further than our educational system. Education has shifted and changed quite a lot over the last few decades, and certainly since the 70s when prayer was removed from public schools. We saw materials and curriculum changing, and most recently, people of faith who want to express that faith in an educational setting suffering from persecution. We've had some wins though. So what Brad and I just talked about over at Brad Dacus Live was the 10 Commandments being displayed back in some public schools. Louisiana is a state where that has passed. Now other states like South Dakota are working to try to make that a reality. This isn't something new coming in. This is something being brought back into our school system. It's a fight, but so far we've experienced some wins. Now, where the fight continues, again, as people try to bring those 10 Commandments back into schools, other areas in education like prayer, open prayer, good news clubs, which again, PJI has worked with and heard from and featured on this very show, Faith and Law. Good news clubs are after-school programs where kids can learn about the Bible and pray. They are not officially involved with the public school system, but what has happened is public schools have tried to keep them from operating on their school campuses. Now, they're not in the right legally, but they're still going to try to say and make any excuse they can to keep good news clubs off of campuses. We're also seeing this in certain students trying to wear faith-based or religious clothing or paraphernalia at schools and getting some persecution there. So the fight certainly continues. And we're seeing it not just in education and in schools, we're really seeing it all over the country in people who want to express their faith having a difficult time with those who don't want to see that happen, and of course offering the separation of church and state as the reasoning why. But again, that's the flipped understanding of what that means. and certainly in our political realm. The message seems to be that we should be keeping our religion and our faith quiet, when, again, that establishment clause said that we are free to express ourselves and our religion and our faith publicly should we choose. All right, so as men and women of faith, how do we navigate this? How do we move forward in a world that is pushing back against how we are called to live out our faith boldly here? Well, step one is what we just covered, and that's understanding this issue, and not just understanding the history and the true meaning of separation of church and state, but sharing that with others so that we can have a proper foundation to move forward and operate in our day-to-day. Secondarily, we've got to understand the opposition's tactics and see them coming, like we just chatted about with the Good News Clubs. Sometimes these opposition forces are not always in the legal right. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. That doesn't stop them. They know that they can slow us down in the back and forth and maybe a legal fight. And again, PJI has tremendous resources online at pji.org and articles and help available should you find yourself in a position like this. And finally, take advantage of those resources and legal avenues. Sometimes the opposition's going to push until you lawyer up, and they hope that you won't. So I hope that this has given you a better understanding of what the separation of church and state was meant to be and how it was meant to support and give freedoms and rights to men and women of faith.
Thank you, Kyle, for that thoughtful diving into the issue. Folks, we at the Pacific Justice Institute, we're committed to defending your religious freedom. The fact is, we have many in our society today throughout the United States that still have this in their heads, thanks a lot to public schools and universities, that somehow it's not freedom of religion, it's freedom from religion. I remember when I was in law school at the University of Texas, I had a professor who, by the way, happened to be a member of the ACLU. He decided to use that phrase, as the Constitution says in the First Amendment, freedom from religion. I said, whoa, professor, doesn't it actually really say freedom of religion, the freedom to exercise religion? He goes, yeah, that's right. So whether we're talking about kindergarten or we're talking about professors in law schools, this lie, this deception of the separation of church and state is continuing to go forward. It's nowhere in the Constitution. Ray Hackey did a great job explaining the fact that this is something that has been created by activist judges and a twisting of language in a prior Supreme Court decision and then used in a way to sterilize religion from the public square, to sterilize it from public schools, to silence students, to silence faith. We at the Pacific Justice Institute, we have online a free copy of a book called Reclaim Your School. You can download it for free. It talks all about how you can have faith in public schools. It's right there. It's free on our website, pji.org. Then we have the misnomer that, you have to be quiet about your faith in the workplace. Even maybe in the private sector, people say that. They try to say, the Constitution prevents you from sharing your faith at work. No, first off, the Establishment Clause wouldn't even apply to the private sector because the private sector is not government. It only applies to government actions. Point two, people working for the government, they have a right to share their faith. We've defended people working for different government agencies who are silenced and says, you can't share your faith. You can't have a cross on your desk. You can't invite someone to a church program, an Easter program. These are all real cases. And you know what? We go head to head with each of these and we win. Why? Because the Constitution is on our side. Title VII, Civil Rights Act, is also on our side in defending faith in the workplace, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector. Private sector, you have Title VII. Public sector, you have Title VII, but you also have proper interpretation of the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. So we want religious freedom to flourish in these places, but also in the public square. We need to have the ability for people to feel comfortable and at liberty to proclaim the gospel, to preach their faith, to share their testimony in public parks, on public sidewalks, throughout the public square. And we at PJI are committed to doing that. And we want you to be emboldened, not to be timid, but to boldly live and share your faith. And I want to share with you now a verse that I think really captivates this. And I pray that this will really pierce your heart. Here's what it says. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 13. It says, "Be on guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be courageous. Be strong." So let's start first with be on your guard. What does this mean? This means that we need to have our eyes open to when we're going to be challenged and prevented from sharing and living our faith. We need to not just have our head in the sand. We need to understand the time and the days in which we live. And we need to understand what our rights are in order to effectively live our faith for such a time as this. One great way of doing that, by the way, is to sign up to get our free e-newsletter. You can do that on our website. Once again, pji.org. It's our free e-newsletter called The Legal Insider. It'll keep you updated on our many, many cases across the country, over 270 as we speak. Cases and litigation across the country. You can pray for us. You can be aware of what's happening and be attuned to the different challenges that you may be facing at school, work, or someplace else. Next, stand firm. Sometimes Christians say, "Oh, we're Christians, we need to back down." No, stand firm with the hope that is within you. Don't apologize for your faith. Live your faith, share your faith in love, with wisdom, and seek the Holy Spirit's guidance as you're doing that. Be courageous. What's the opposite of being courageous? Fearful. Don't be guided by fear. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and discipline. Be courageous. And finally, be strong. Strong in yourself? No. Strong in Christ, knowing that He's got your back. We at PJI are here to represent you and defend you without charge, but bottom line, He has your back. The Lord will never leave you or forsake you. And be pleasers of God, not pleasers of men. Be strong. Don't be weak. I hope these words of encouragement are something you can take to heart, because people need to know Jesus. We need to live our faith and share our faith. And do not be intimidated when you hear that phrase, separation of church and state. It's simply not true. It's simply not constitutional. So folks, I challenge you to take your faith seriously. We're going to have persecutions. We're going to have challenges to our faith. But remember this, no matter what we face, no matter what the challenge, always, always keep the faith.